Welcome to the edge of the galaxy, where silence can kill and order can become a death sentence. Tonight's story follows Aria Vega, the only human at the Galactic Academy of Psychic Arts and Sciences. When a predatory entity tears through structured minds and turns discipline into bait, oxygen fails, shields collapse, survival demands an unthinkable choice. In the darkness between stars, chaos may be the only thing that lives. Stay with us and listen closely. The Academy shuddered before the alarms began. Light fractured across the curved classroom walls as a psychic shockwave ripped through the orbital ring. Minds screamed without sound. Desks lifted, then slammed down. Telepathic students collapsed, clutching their temples as invisible pressure crushed organized thought into static. Aria Vega did not fall. She felt it, a presence moving through the neural lattice like a predator testing fences. Oxygen warnings flared crimson. The air thinned with a metallic bite. Professor Thalric staggered, eye stalks trembling, shields unraveling in strips of shattered cognition. The station's gravity flickered. Bodies drifted briefly before crashing back down. Somewhere deep within the structure, something fed. Aria closed her eyes, not in fear, but in calculation. If it hunted order, then chaos would be her camouflage. She let the noise rise inside her, wild and unstructured, and waited for the second strike. Red strobes ignited along the ceiling as bulkheads slammed shut with bone-shaking force. Atmospheric pressure dropped another fraction. Breath came thin and sharp. Loomis convulsed beside Aria, bioluminescent tendrils flashing erratically as empathic overload tore through him. Around them, telepaths writhed in synchronized collapse, their structured shields unraveling like glass under heat. The station AI's voice stuttered through static. Life support failure in multiple sectors, neural grid destabilized, evacuation pending synchronization. Synchronization meant order. Order meant bait. Aria grabbed Loomis and hauled him upright, boots skidding across trembling deck plates. A corridor ahead vented into vacuum. Wind roared through ruptured seams. She cycled the manual override, forcing the hatch to half-seal. Metal screamed. Gravity flickered again. She dragged Loomis through as the corridor behind them imploded, sealing darkness on the other side. The corridor fell silent except for the rasp of failing air recyclers. Loomis sagged against the wall, glow dimming, while distant psychic screams cut off one by one. Aria felt it again, the presence sliding along the neural grid, probing, devouring coherence wherever it found clean patterns of thought. It brushed past her, paused, moved on. No hook, no structure, nothing stable to feed on. She understood then. It hunted symmetry, discipline, mental architecture built with precision. Her mind offered none of that. She let fragments collide freely, half-remembered songs, broken equations, childhood arguments, random numbers, colors without shape. The predator skimmed her surface and slipped away. Frustrated, around them, ordered minds went dark like extinguished stars. Aria tightened her grip on Loomis and started forward. If chaos made her invisible, she would become a storm no predator could swallow. Across the academy, disciplined minds aligned in reflex. Telepathic students formed synchronized barriers, layers of crystalline thought interlocking with flawless precision. For a heartbeat, the psychic lattice brightened, an intricate web of order fighting back. Then the web screamed. The entity surged toward coherence like a starving animal scenting blood. One by one, the structured shields imploded, bodies stiffened, lifted, then dropped as neural pathways burned out in cascading silence. The more perfectly they focused, the faster they fell. Entire study clusters collapsed mid-synchronization, their mental harmonies snapping into static. Aria felt the tremor ripple through the grid, organized resistance acting like a flare in darkness. Order was not defense, it was invitation. Loomis trembled beside her, sensing the pattern too late. Around them, the Academy's finest minds extinguished themselves by doing exactly what they had been trained to do. Professor Thalric staggered into the corridor, eye stalks twitching, neural filaments flickering like dying stars. His psychic voice broke through the static in fractured bursts, no longer dignified, no longer controlled. The entity does not attack randomly. He transmitted, each word jagged with pain. It follows symmetry. It devours coherence around him. Faint motes of structured thought leaked from collapsing students, drawing the predator closer. Thalrix forced himself upright, projecting one final pulse toward Aria. Your mind, disordered, nonlinear, confuses it. Do not align. Do not focus. Then his shields shattered. The presence struck with surgical precision, stripping layers of cultivated discipline in seconds. His body remained standing for a moment longer, then folded to the deck in terrible stillness. Aria felt the silence where his consciousness had been. Order had fallen. Chaos was all that remained. A pressure alert shrieked as the next hatch ahead buckled inward. The corridor beyond had already vented to space. Frost spidered across metal where atmosphere had flash frozen. Wind tore through the narrowing gap, dragging debris and loose bodies toward the stars. Aria slammed her palm against the manual override. The mechanism resisted, gears grinding under strain. Loomis slipped, tendrils snapping in panic as suction pulled him sideways. She caught him by the harness and anchored her boots to the deck's magnetic strips. Air roared past her ears, stealing heat, stealing breath. The hatch jerked halfway closed. Stuck. She forced her mind into chaos again, blocking the predator's curiosity, and shoved Loomis through the shrinking opening. Metal screamed. The corridor imploded behind them, sealing vacuum in a violent thunderclap of compressed silence. Emergency glyphs pulsed along the walls, guiding survivors toward the evacuation bay, the Station A. I repeated the protocol in a fractured loop. Launch authorization requires synchronized neural stabilization across registered occupants. Aria reached the staging chamber and saw the problem instantly. Telepathic students knelt in tight formation, attempting collective calm, their thoughts aligning into fragile symmetry. The pods remained locked, waiting for coherent psychic confirmation. Each attempt at focus flared across the grid like a beacon. The entity shifted direction, drawn to the ordered signal, one by one. The kneeling figures convulsed as their shields collapsed mid-alignment. The bay filled with collapsing bodies and failed synchronization chimes. Loomis swayed beside her, whispering that order was their only training. Aria stared at the sealed pods and understood the brutal truth. The protocol itself was bait. Aria stepped into the center of the staging chamber as the last synchronization attempt failed. Telepathic feedback crackled through the air like heat lightning. She forced her breathing steady and did the opposite of what the protocol demanded. Instead of calming her mind, she detonated it. Numbers without sequence, half-remembered lyrics, childhood arguments, random colors, irrational fears. She let them collide and multiply. The psychic grid spasmed. The entity hesitated, confused by the absence of structure. Loomis felt the disruption ripple outward, destabilizing the ordered signal long enough for the pods to flicker from red to amber, not unlocked, yet no longer feeding the predator. Aria grabbed the manual launch lever and overrode the synchronization subroutine. The chamber lights dimmed. The AI protested in fragmented warnings. Chaos had become a key the system was never designed to recognize. The pods would not sustain the entire ring. Even if some launched, the neural grid would remain active, drawing the entity back. Aria saw the architecture schematics flash across a damaged display. The psychic nexus lay beneath the central ring, anchoring every mind aboard. If it stayed online, the predator would return stronger. If it shut down abruptly, every consciousness still linked would burn out instantly. Loomis understood before she spoke. The only path ran through the core. They left the bay and descended into maintenance shafts vibrating with failing power. Heat rose from overloaded conduits. Sparks fell like metallic rain. Gravity faltered again, turning ladders into vertical drift. Aria climbed anyway, thoughts unraveling into deliberate disorder. The deeper they went, the louder the predator's presence hummed through the structure. Waiting at the heart, heat radiated from the conduit walls as they descended, and Loomis began to flicker uncontrollably. His bioluminescent tendrils pulsed in fractured rhythms, absorbing echoes of terror from every dying mind still linked to the grid. Empathic feedback hit him in waves. Panic, confusion, pain, none of it his own. Yet all of it burning through his neural filaments. He stumbled, colliding with the bulkhead, light dimming to a sickly blue. Aria caught him before he drifted into the shaft's open drop. The predator's hum intensified below, feeding steadily on organized collapse. Loomis tried to speak, but the transmission fractured into static. His species survived through shared emotional resonance. Now that same gift was tearing him apart. Aria forced chaos higher inside her mind, shielding him in turbulent noise, but she could feel the cost mounting in his fading glow. A burst of static crackled from the wall panel as a fractured hologram flickered to life. The station AI manifested in broken segments, voice looping through corrupted code. Core temperature critical. Reactor containment at 40% integrity. Neural nexus instability accelerating. Aria pressed her palm against the interface, forcing manual access while sparks showered across the deck. The AI attempted to re-establish synchronization protocols, but each structured command spiked the predator's presence deeper below. Loomis twitched beside her, barely conscious. Estimated time to cascade failure: 9 minutes. The AI stuttered before glitching into silence. The lights dimmed further. Emergency power diverted toward containment fields already failing. Aria rerouted auxiliary circuits, severing non-essential systems. Every decision tightened the margin for survival. The station was not just under attack, it was eating itself from within. A metallic hiss cut through the shaft as warning sigils flared ultraviolet along the walls. Reactor bleed. Fine cracks spidered across the conduit housing, venting ionized particles into the narrow passage. Aria felt the sting against her skin, even through the suit's thinning shield layer. Loomis recoiled weakly, glow flickering under invisible assault. The dosimeter on her wrist climbed in steady increments, each number another unseen wound. She scanned the damage and yanked an emergency sealant cartridge from the wall rack. Foam burst outward in expanding silver lattice, hardening over the fractures while radiation sparked against it like distant lightning. The predator's hum intensified below, drawn by the structured containment fields fighting collapse. Aria locked the final clamp in place and pulled Loomis forward. Every second they lingered here carved time from their future. The data vault doors groaned open under emergency override, revealing a chamber pulsing with failing holographic archives. Streams of psychic telemetry flickered across suspended light panels, each spike mapping another collapse within the academy. Aria dragged Loomis inside and sealed the hatch behind them. The chamber's shielding dampened the Predator's hum just enough to think. She scanned the last intact records. Every surge in the entity's activity aligned perfectly with synchronized neural patterns. Coherent thought acted like gravity, pulling it closer. Disordered neural signatures barely registered on the threat index. Humanity's cognitive scatter appeared in the logs as statistical noise, invisible to the feeding model. Loomis watched the patterns dim in horror as more minds blinked out. The truth was no longer theory. The Academy's strength, order, was its fatal flaw. Aria stood beneath the flickering projection grid and let the data sink in. Every species aboard had evolved toward mental refinement, discipline, clarity, harmony. The entity hunted that refinement like a parasite keyed to symmetry. Humanity, by contrast, registered as cognitive turbulence. In the threat matrix, her neural scans appeared fragmented, inconsistent, statistically irrelevant. Loomis processed the implications slowly, light trembling. "You are immune," he transmitted faintly. "Not immune," Aria corrected. "Invisible." She closed her eyes and deliberately amplified the internal disorder. Songs colliding with equations, memories tangled with nonsense. The vault sensors struggled to chart her pattern. For the first time since the rupture, she felt something like advantage. Chaos was not weakness. It was misdirection, camouflage, armor against a predator that mistook disorder for emptiness. The galaxy's anomaly had become its unintended shield. With the vault's dampening field active, the predator's hum receded to a distant vibration. For several fragile minutes, collapse slowed. Life support stabilized at minimal thresholds. Reactor bleed plateaued. The telemetry display showed fewer neural extinctions flickering out. Loomis's glow steadied slightly, and even Aria's breathing eased. The AI fragment reappeared, reporting temporary grid isolation around the lower ring. It looked survivable. Aria allowed herself a measured calculation. If she could expand the dampening radius and keep the nexus unstable but contained, the entity might starve. She began rerouting auxiliary power toward the shielding lattice. The lights brightened marginally. Then the telemetry spiked. A surge of organized resistance flared elsewhere in the station, an attempt to restore full synchronization. The Predator pivoted instantly, accelerating toward the renewed signal. The vault trembled. Hope shattered. Across the upper ring, surviving telepaths attempted one final coordinated defense. Aria watched the telemetry spike into perfect geometric symmetry as dozens of minds aligned in disciplined formation. The psychic lattice brightened like a beacon in deep space. For a heartbeat, it looked magnificent, ordered, unified, controlled. Then the Predator surged. It struck the synchronized pattern with predatory precision, accelerating as the coherence intensified. Neural signatures flared and collapsed in cascading waves. The more structured their resistance became, the more violently the entity fed. The data vault shuddered under the reflected backlash, panels cracking as feedback rippled through the grid. Loomis cried out, overwhelmed by the echo of collective fracture. Aria clenched her jaw, watching order self-destruct. The counterattack had not repelled the threat. It had amplified it beyond containment. A sudden surge of structured brilliance flared across the telemetry feed. Singular, focused, unmistakable. Professor Thalrix, somehow still conscious within the collapsing grid. He reassembled fragments of his shattered discipline into one final coherent construct. The psychic pattern burned with deliberate symmetry, brighter than any collective alignment before it. Aria understood instantly. He was drawing the predator Awa from the vault, offering himself as the most ordered signal available. The entity responded with brutal efficiency, redirecting its full mass toward his luminous signature for several precious seconds. Neural collapse elsewhere slowed. Loomis felt the shift and gasped in fragile relief. Then Thalrix's signal fractured. The brilliant geometry dissolved into static, extinguished in an instant. The telemetry flatlined where his consciousness had been. He had not survived the maneuver. He had only delayed extinction. A low mechanical chime echoed through the vault as atmospheric readouts shifted again. Oxygen concentration, 12% and falling. The air grew thin and metallic, each breath sharper than the last. Condensation gathered along the walls where temperature controls failed. Luma's bioluminescence dimmed further, flickering in erratic pulses as his species struggled under low oxygen conditions. Aria felt dizziness creep along the edges of her vision, but forced herself upright. The AI fragment stuttered another warning about reactor containment and critical life support depletion before collapsing into silence. The predator's hum remained constant below. Patient, feeding. Without breathable air, immunity would not matter. Aria sealed her suit helmet and routed emergency oxygen to Loomis's harness. The gauge ticked downward immediately. Every inhalation was now a countdown measured in stolen seconds. The access tunnel ended at a sealed blast door etched with psychic conduit lines. The Nexus core lay beyond. But the interface panel flashed one message in relentless crimson: full grid convergence required for shutdown. Aria slammed her gloved hand against the control surface, forcing a diagnostic read. The system demanded synchronized neural authorization from multiple aligned minds, precisely the pattern the predator consumed. Manual override pathways had been locked behind the same safeguard. The designers had never imagined chaos as a legitimate key. Loomis hovered weakly beside her, helmet fogging from shallow breaths, unable to contribute the required coherence. Behind them, the structure vibrated as containment fields strained. The predator pressed closer to the core, sensing the dense architecture of ordered thought. The door remained sealed. The grid would not die quietly. Loomis' glow flickered once, then collapsed into dim blue embers. His body drifted weightless in the failing gravity field, tendrils curling inward as oxygen deprivation and empathic trauma shut him down. Aria caught him before he struck the bulkhead and secured his harness to her suit. His neural signal was faint, barely above silence. No synchronization, no reinforcement, no second mind to share the burden. The blast door loomed before her, crimson warnings pulsing in steady, indifferent rhythm. Behind the sealed metal, the Nexus hummed with dense architecture, a cathedral of order feeding the predator's appetite. Aria felt the isolation settle like pressure in her chest. Every disciplined mind that could have unlocked the system was gone. Only her remained, fractured, nonlinear, incompatible with the design. She was the anomaly, and anomalies survived alone. The lights died without warning. One moment the corridor pulsed red. The next it vanished into absolute black. Emergency systems failed in sequence, each click echoing through the tunnel until even the reactor's distant vibration faded. The Predator's hum softened, no longer urgent, as if confident victory required no rush. Aria's helmet display flickered to low power mode, oxygen countdown glowing in pale digits against darkness, without the grid's energy. The Nexus fell into dormant lock, neither active nor destroyed. The station felt hollow, stripped of voices, stripped of thought. Silence pressed against her ears, heavier than noise had ever been, for the first time since the rupture. There was no psychic scream, no telemetry spike, only absence. Aria listened to her own heartbeat and realized survival now depended on what she would choose next. In the darkness, with only her suit display casting pale light, Aria's mind drifted to Earth, not the idealized blue marble from Academy Hollows, but the real one, storms tearing coastlines apart, cities blazing under human conflict, children laughing in streets built from centuries of contradiction. Humanity had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and its own worst impulses. Order had never defined it. Chaos had. Creativity born from instability. Adaptation forged in crisis. She remembered heat rising from asphalt after summer rain, the taste of overspiced food, arguments that ended in forgiveness. Earth was not harmonious. It endured by refusing to be predictable. The Predator hunting this station would have thrived on perfection. On Earth, it would have starved. Aria felt something steady beneath the fear. She was the product of a world that survived by breaking patterns. The truth settled with brutal clarity. The Nexus could not be shut down cleanly if she severed it violently. Every consciousness still trapped within the residual grid would burn out instantly. If she left it dormant, the Predator would recover and finish feeding. Survival required a choice measured in lives, not numbers on a console. Aria studied Loomis's faint neural pulse and understood that even saving one mind might demand sacrificing others. Humanity had faced such arithmetic before, imperfect, merciless, unavoidable. Chaos had always meant responsibility as much as freedom. She could not preserve the Academy as it was. She could only prevent total extinction. The cost would be irreversible. Her oxygen timer ticked lower, indifferent to morality. Aria exhaled slowly and accepted what survival demanded. She would become the disruption, whatever it destroyed. Aria placed her gloved hand against the Nexus interface and initiated a forbidden pathway. Instead of requesting convergence, she forced the system into diagnostic assimilation mode, routing its intake channels directly into her neural stream. Warning glyphs flared, protesting unauthorized cognitive patterns. She ignored them. If the grid demanded structure, she would drown it in disorder. Oxygen dipped lower. Loomis' pulse flickered on her display. There would be no partial solution, no elegant shutdown, only rupture. She opened every chaotic fragment within her, contradictory memories, irrational fears, laughter tangled with grief, and prepared to inject them into the heart of the lattice. This was not heroism. It was selection. She chose extinction of order over extinction of all. The system locked onto her anomaly, uncertain. Aria forced the connection deeper and committed. The Nexus interface resisted as Aria forced the manual override deeper. Data streams cascaded across her visor, demanding alignment codes she refused to supply. Instead, she injected raw neural input directly into the lattice. The system attempted to categorize her cognition, failed, and recalibrated in confusion. Structured conduits flickered, unable to stabilize around her nonlinear patterns. The Predator stirred, sensing disruption where harmony once existed. Aria tightened the connection, bypassing security subroutines one by one, feeling the grid press back against her mind like static against bare skin. Pain lanced through her temples, but she held the override open. Loomis's faint signal remained tethered behind her. This was the point of no return. The Nexus no longer demanded order. It was being forced to absorb chaos at its source. Aria released restraint and let the storm surge. Thought collided with thought in violent cascade. Nursery rhymes tangled with orbital equations. Childhood memories slamming against fragments of alien lectures. The taste of ghost pepper heat flaring beside images of collapsing stars. She reversed lyrics, multiplied irrational numbers, visualized oceans boiling upward into sky. The Nexus convulsed as the data lattice attempted to map her input and failed. Conduits overheated, pathways misfired, synchronization protocols shredded under nonlinear assault. The Predator lunged toward the sudden disturbance, expecting coherence, and instead met endless contradiction. It could not parse the signal. It could not digest what refused pattern. The grid flooded with cognitive static so dense it became gravitational turbulence. Aria felt neurons burn at the edges of her awareness, but she did not reduce the flow. The Predator struck the Nexus core with full force, expecting symmetry to anchor its feeding cycle. Instead, it collided with turbulence. Neural pathways that once formed elegant geometry now writhed in chaotic interference. Each attempt to isolate coherent structure dissolved into contradiction before it could take shape. The entity pulsed in agitation, its presence flickering across the grid like a starving shadow. It tried to latch onto fragments of discipline, but Aria's cognitive storm shredded every foothold. The more it pushed, the more the lattice destabilized beyond usable pattern. For the first time since the rupture, its advance slowed, signals weakened, the hum faded into erratic static, starved of order, deprived of symmetry. The Predator recoiled from the core, retreating into the dark beyond the station's fractured orbit. As the Predator's presence receded, emergency systems flickered back in fractured bursts. The Nexus, stripped of structured coherence, defaulted to survival redundancy. Evacuation pods across the ring unlocked without requiring synchronization, their launch protocols shifting to manual autonomy. Aria severed her connection to the core and staggered back as the station groaned around her. Through a cracked viewport, she saw escape vessels ignite one after another, thrusters flaring against the darkness. Debris spiraled outward as portions of the orbital ring collapsed under internal damage. Loomis's harness indicator pulsed faint but stable. He was alive. Oxygen alarms screamed again, urging immediate evacuation. Aria dragged him toward the nearest functional pod as the Academy's central spire fractured in slow, silent collapse behind them. Survival had begun. The cost had not yet been counted. Inside the escape pod, Aria sealed the hatch as automated clamps fired. The launch thrusters ignited, hurling them clear of the dying ring. Through the viewport, she watched entire sections of the Academy shear away, drifting like broken ribs in orbit. Telemetry confirmed partial survival. Some pods escaped, but vast sectors remained dark. Their minds extinguished when the grid collapsed. Thalrix's signal was absent. Hundreds of neural signatures would never reignite. Loomis stirred weakly beside her, bioluminescence returning in fragile pulses. She checked radiation exposure levels and oxygen reserves, both survivable, though marked with permanent cost. Survival had not been clean. It had required sacrifice, deliberate and irreversible. The pod rotated toward distant rescue beacons, carrying the living away from the ruins of order that once defined their world. The rescue carrier found them hours later, adrift among cooling debris and fading radiation trails. Aria stood inside the medbay, suit scorched, neural monitors mapping microscopic damage across her cortex. Outside the viewport, the Academy's remnants drifted in silent orbit around a dead star, its once perfect ring fractured beyond repair. Loomis rested in stasis beside her, alive because chaos had intervened. Reports would call it anomaly, disruption, failure of structure. They would not understand that order had been the weakness. Aria watched technicians catalog survivors and loss with clinical precision. Humanity's mind, messy, nonlinear, impossible to categorize, had endured where symmetry collapsed. She felt no triumph, only weight. In the vast silence of space, one truth remained clear. When perfection dies, chaos continues breathing. What remains after survival is never clean. The Academy fell. Brilliant minds were lost, and Aria endured not because she was stronger, but because she was different. In a universe built on symmetry, it was human chaos that became armor. This is a story about choice under pressure, about the cost of saving some when you cannot save all. If this journey moved you, follow the channel and return with us for the next story beyond the stars.